My daughter-in-law brought tea. For your health, Mom. Drink it every evening. For 3 months, I drank it and felt worse and worse. But one day, my doctor friend came to visit and turned pale. Do you understand what this is? When she showed me. Good day, dear listeners. It's Louisa again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Margaret Ellen Cooley, and I was 67 years old when my daughter-in-law tried to quietly destroy me, one cup of tea at a time. I want to start at the beginning, because the beginning matters. Before any of this happened, my life was ordinary in the most beautiful way. I lived in the same White House on Clover Street in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where I had raised my son Daniel for 30 years. The porch still had the same green swing where I used to read on summer evenings. The kitchen smelled like coffee and old wood. I had my routines: morning walks around the block, Wednesday lunches with my friend Patricia, Saturday calls with my sister Carol in Ohio. I volunteered at the local library twice a week. I was healthy. Not perfect, not young, but healthy. My doctor, Linda Marsh, told me at my annual checkup that my blood work was clean for a woman my age. Keep doing whatever you're doing, Margaret, she said, and I left her office feeling genuinely proud of myself. Then Daniel married Renee. I should be careful here, because I don't want to sound like a bitter old woman who couldn't accept her son's wife. I tried. Lord knows I tried. When Daniel brought her home for the first time, I made pot roast and set out the good china. Renee was 34, attractive, with sharp green eyes and a smile that came and went too quickly. She worked in real estate. She had a way of looking around a room, at the furniture, the walls, the bookshelves, that felt less like curiosity and more like appraisal. But I told myself I was imagining things. Daniel was happy. That was what mattered. They married in the spring and bought a house 20 minutes from mine. At first, visits were occasional. Holidays, birthdays, Sunday dinners every few weeks. Renee was polite but distant. She called me Margaret, never Mom, which was fine. I didn't push. Some people need time to warm up. I gave her time. The change came gradually, the way most dangerous things do. About 8 months after the wedding, Renee began coming around more often. Not with Daniel, alone. She would stop by on weekday afternoons, always with some small gift, a candle, a magazine, a jar of jam. I was touched. I thought she was finally making an effort. I told Carol on the phone that maybe I had misjudged her. Then one evening in October, she arrived with a small wooden box tied with a ribbon. I found this at a specialty shop downtown, she said, setting it on my kitchen table. It's an herbal blend, supposed to be wonderful for circulation and sleep. The woman at the shop swore by it. She smiled. That quick, practiced smile. I thought of you immediately. You should drink a cup every evening, for your health, Mom. That was the first time she called me Mom. I remember looking at the box. The tea was loose leaf, dark and slightly earthy smelling, with dried petals mixed in. It looked expensive. It looked thoughtful. That's very sweet of you, Renee, I said, and I made myself a cup that very night. It tasted slightly bitter, but I assumed that was the herbs. I added honey. I finished the whole cup. For the first few weeks, I noticed nothing unusual. I slept reasonably well. Life continued. Renee kept visiting, always cheerful, always asking whether I was drinking the tea. Every evening, right, Mom? It only works if you're consistent. I found her persistence a little odd, but I was charmed by her attention. I told Patricia she had finally come around. Then, somewhere around the 6th week, small things began to shift. I started waking up with headaches that I couldn't explain. Not sharp pain, a dull, persistent pressure behind my eyes. I assumed it was the season change. Then came the fatigue. I had always been an energetic person, up by 7, moving through the day without dragging. But now I found myself exhausted by noon, needing to sit, struggling to concentrate. I missed one of my Wednesday lunches with Patricia because I simply couldn't get myself off the couch. That had never happened before. My appetite changed. Food tasted faintly metallic. I dropped 7 pounds in 2 months without trying. My hands sometimes trembled slightly in the mornings. I told myself it was stress, age, a passing virus. 3 months passed like this. Each time Renee visited, she would glance at the tea box on the counter and refill it when it ran low, always bringing a fresh supply. "You're looking a little tired, Mom," she'd say, tilting her head with concern. "Make sure you're drinking your tea." And every evening, I drank my tea. It was a Tuesday in January when everything changed. Patricia had stopped by unannounced. She did that sometimes, just showing up with coffee and gossip. Patricia Chen had been my friend for 22 years and my doctor for the last 8. She wasn't there in a professional capacity that afternoon. She was just visiting, but when she walked into my kitchen, she stopped. She looked at the wooden box on the counter. She picked it up. She opened it and smelled it, and the color left her face like water draining from a glass. "Margaret," she said quietly, "do you understand what this is?" The silence that followed Patricia's question was the longest of my life. She was standing at my kitchen counter, holding the open tea box in both hands, her face still that terrible pale color. I had known Patricia Chen for over 2 decades. I had seen her deliver bad news to patients with calm professionalism. I had never seen her look frightened. "Patricia," I said, "what is it? What's wrong with it?" She set the box down carefully, as though it might break or burn. She turned to me. "This has foxglove in it," she said. "I can see the dried leaves, the shape, the color." "Margaret, foxglove contains digitalis glycosides. In a controlled medical dose, it's used for heart conditions, but consumed regularly as a tea, without any medical supervision, it accumulates in the body. It causes exactly the symptoms you've been describing to me for months." She paused. Fatigue, nausea, appetite loss, hand tremors, headaches. I heard her words. I processed them in sequence, but for a moment they did not connect into meaning. "It's an herbal tea," I said stupidly. "Renee bought it at a specialty shop." "Margaret." Patricia's voice was very level now, very doctor-like. "I need you to hear me. This is not a safe herbal blend. This is not something any reputable shop sells for casual consumption. Foxglove is toxic. Chronic low-dose exposure can cause serious cardiac arrhythmia. In elderly patients, it can be fatal." She looked straight at me. "How long have you been drinking this?" I did the math. I stood in my own kitchen under the yellow light I had lived under for 30 years, and I counted the weeks backward. 3 months, I said. Patricia closed her eyes for just a second. When she opened them, she was all composure and purpose. "I want you to come to my office tomorrow morning. First thing. I need to run an EKG and a full blood panel. We need to know where your heart is right now." She picked up her phone. "And Margaret, do not drink any more of that tea. Not one more cup." I nodded, but my mind was already somewhere else. It was already with Renee. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the dark in my bedroom, the room where I had slept alone since Harold died 6 years ago. And I let myself think the thought I had been refusing to think since Patricia left. Renee had given me this tea. Renee had encouraged me to drink it every single evening. Renee had refilled it, monitored it, insisted on it. "For your health, Mom." my health. I thought about the way she looked around rooms, the way she smiled. I thought about the fact that Daniel stood to inherit this house, this property, the savings account Harold had spent 30 years building. I thought about the life insurance policy that was not enormous, but was not nothing. I thought about how Renee had introduced the tea at exactly the right time. After the wedding, after she had established herself, after there was something to gain. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was a paranoid old woman lying in the dark, making monsters out of shadows. But Patricia Chen, careful, evidence-based, skeptical Patricia, had gone pale at the sight of that box. That was not nothing. By 3 a.m, the fear had hardened into something colder and more useful. Anger. I was not going to die quietly in my green swing house while Renee refilled my tea. I was not going to pretend nothing had happened and see where the next 3 months took me. I was 67 years old, and I had buried a husband, raised a son alone for the last years of his childhood, and kept this house standing through 2 recessions. I was not a woman who lay down. I needed a plan. The first piece was medical. Patricia's appointment was already set. I needed to know the damage, exactly, precisely, with numbers and records. I needed documentation of my health decline over the past 3 months, and a clear medical record connecting my symptoms to the substance Patricia had identified. The second piece was the tea itself. I did not throw it away that night, though every instinct told me to. It was evidence. I understood that much even in my sleepless state. I found a clean plastic Ziploc bag in the kitchen drawer, transferred a careful portion of the loose leaves into it, and sealed it. Then I put the wooden box in a separate bag and placed both in the back of my coat closet, behind Harold's old wool coat that still hung there. I could not bring myself to throw that coat away. Now it was guarding something important. The third piece was information. I did not know, in any legal or procedural sense, what my options were. Was what Renee had done a crime? It felt like a crime. It felt like the most intimate, calculated betrayal I could imagine, using my own gratitude against me, wrapping poison in the gesture of care. But feeling was not the same as knowing. I had a neighbor, Frank DeLuca, who had worked as a paralegal for many years before retirement. I had helped Frank when his wife was ill, sitting with her on afternoons when he needed a break. Frank owed me nothing, but he was a decent man, and I believed he would talk to me honestly. I wrote his name on the notepad by my bed, along with Patricia's appointment time, and the words, "Do not let this go." Then I lay back and watched the ceiling until the light outside my window turned gray. In the morning, I dressed carefully. I put on the blue blazer I wore to church. I wanted to feel like myself, composed, deliberate, not like a frightened old woman. I fed the cat. I watered the plant by the window. I did everything in the correct order. Then I drove to Patricia's office and sat in the chair across from her desk and let her tell me the truth. My EKG showed a mild irregularity. My potassium levels were off. The blood panel revealed indicators consistent with, as Patricia carefully phrased it in writing, for the record, chronic low-level cardiac glycoside exposure. She was measured and precise in everything she wrote. She knew, as I knew, that these documents might matter. "You were lucky," she told me when she sat down. "Genuinely lucky. Another few months and we might have been looking at a serious cardiac event. Another few months." I thought of Renee in my kitchen, smiling. "For your health, Mom." "Patricia," I said, "I need your help with something." The day I walked into the Harrisburg Police Department was cold and gray. The kind of January morning that makes Pennsylvania feel like the edge of the world. I had spent 3 days preparing. Frank DeLuca had sat with me at his kitchen table for 2 hours, listening without interruption as I laid out everything: the tea, Patricia's findings, the timeline. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he folded his hands and said, "Margaret, what you're describing, if it's what it sounds like, falls under criminal poisoning statutes, potentially aggravated assault. Depending on intent, possibly attempted homicide." He said it gently, but he said it plainly. Frank was that kind of person. "You need to go to the police with the physical evidence and the medical documentation. Go in person. Ask specifically for a detective, not a desk officer. And bring everything in writing." So that was what I did. I brought the 2 sealed bags from my coat closet. I brought the printed copy of Patricia's medical report, which she had prepared formally, signed and dated, detailing the EKG irregularity and the blood panel findings. I brought a handwritten timeline I had drafted at my kitchen table. Every date Renee had brought tea. Every date I noticed symptoms worsening. Every conversation I could recall about the tea, including her exact words. "For your health, Mom? Every evening? It only works if you're consistent." The desk officer looked at me the way desk officers sometimes look at older women, politely, cautiously, unsure whether to take me seriously. But I had dressed in my blue blazer again, and I spoke clearly, and I did not cry or ramble, and when I placed Patricia's signed medical report on the counter, his expression changed. He called a detective. Detective Sandra Howell was in her 40s, with close cropped hair, and the manner of someone who had heard a great many stories and learned to reserve judgment until the facts arrived. She took me to a small interview room and listened to everything. She asked careful questions. She did not dismiss me or reassure me falsely. When I finished, she looked at the sealed bags and said, "We'll need to send this to the lab. That will take time. But the medical documentation is significant, Mrs. Cooley. This is worth looking into." Worth looking into. That was enough. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in months. Not happy. The weight of what had happened was still there, pressing against everything. But purposeful. Moving. What I did not expect was how quickly Renee would notice. I had been careful. I had told no one in the family. Not Daniel, not my sister Carol. I had not changed my behavior around Renee in any visible way. When she had called that week to ask if I was well, I told her I was tired but managing. She offered to come by with more tea. I told her I still had plenty, but something shifted. I don't know what it was. Perhaps a phone call she made. Perhaps someone at the police department mentioned my visit to the wrong person. Or perhaps Renee simply sensed a change in the atmosphere, the way certain animals sense weather. Whatever the reason, 4 days after my visit to Detective Howell, Daniel called me. "Mom," he said, "Renee is upset. She says you've been acting strange toward her, distant. She's worried about you." I sat with the phone in my hand and looked out at the gray street. "I've been tired, Daniel," I said. "I haven't been well." "She wants to know if she did something wrong," he said. He sounded uncomfortable, caught in the middle in the way he often was. Daniel was a gentle man, conflict-averse, prone to smoothing things over. Renee knew this about him better than anyone. "Tell her I'm fine," I said. "Just tired." After I hung up, I sat for a long time. Daniel. My son. The thought that lived at the back of my mind and that I hadn't let myself look at directly. Did he know? Could he possibly know what his wife was doing and have said nothing? I did not want to believe it. I refused to believe it until I had reason to believe it. Daniel had always been kind, imperfect, conflict-averse, sometimes blind to things he didn't want to see, but not cruel. not deliberate. I held on to that, but I also understood that his call meant Renee was paying attention now. The lab results came back 11 days later. Detective Howell called me on a Thursday afternoon. She asked if I could come in. I drove to the station with my coat buttoned to the throat and my hands steady on the wheel. She set a printed report on the table between us. The T sample tested positive for digitalis glycosides, she said. Specifically, digoxin-related compounds consistent with dried foxglove, digitalis purpurea, mixed into the herbal blend. The concentration was measurable, not massive, but consistent with the kind of chronic low-dose exposure your physician documented. She paused. Mrs. Cooley, we're opening a formal investigation. I looked at the report. The words were technical, clean, bureaucratic. But what they said was simple. The tea had been what Patricia said it was. I had not imagined it. I was not paranoid. Someone had put poison in my tea and called it love. What happens now? I asked. We'll need to trace the origin of the product, Detective Howell said. The box, the purchase, the shop, if there is one. We'll be speaking with your daughter-in-law. I nodded. My hands were in my lap, folded, still. There was no going back from this. Whatever happened next, with Daniel, with the family, with the life I had lived on Clover Street, none of it would be what it had been before. But I was alive, and I had the report in front of me, and that was the only foundation I needed. The detective's call to Renee happened on a Friday. I know because Daniel called me that same evening, and his voice had changed completely. The careful, smooth tone of our last conversation was gone. He sounded stunned, as if someone had struck him, and the impact hadn't fully registered yet. Mom, he said, the police called Renee today. They asked her about the tea. They want to speak with her formally. A pause. What did you do? What did I do? I took a breath. I reported what happened to me, Daniel. Patricia found toxins in that tea. The lab confirmed it. I almost had a cardiac event. Margaret. He switched to my first name, which he only did under stress. You went to the police against your own family without talking to me first? I talked to my doctor, I said, and a former paralegal. And then I talked to the police, yes, because someone was making me sick. You don't know that Renee, Daniel. My voice surprised even me. It was quiet and absolute, like a door closing. The lab confirmed foxglove in that tea. My doctor documented my decline over 3 months. I am not making this up. I am not confused. I am your mother, and I was being poisoned. The silence on the other end of the line lasted a long time. I need to talk to Renee, he said finally. I think that's a good idea, I said. We hung up. I sat at my kitchen table and pressed my hands flat on the wood, and I let myself feel the full weight of that conversation. The pain of it. The fact that my son's first instinct had been to question me rather than Renee. That was a hurt that would need its own time. But I set it aside. There was work still to do. The threat came 2 days later. On Sunday evening, Renee came to my door alone. I almost didn't open it, but I thought of Detective Howell, and I thought of the lab report, and I opened the door. Renee was composed in the way she always was. Surface perfectly controlled, eyes very alert. She was wearing a gray coat and her hair was pulled back. She looked, if anything, more polished than usual, dressed for something. Margaret, she said, we need to talk. I stepped back and let her in, leaving the door slightly ajar. A small instinct. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where she had placed the wooden tea box 4 months ago, and she looked at me with an expression I had not seen on her before. It wasn't warmth, and it wasn't the distant pleasantness she usually performed. It was something harder and more direct. You know what you're doing to this family, she said. Going to the police, making accusations. Daniel is devastated. His mother is trying to put his wife in prison. His mother was being poisoned, I said. I remained standing. Her jaw tightened. That tea was from a wellness shop in Mechanicsburg. I have the receipt. There was nothing intentional. If there were any unusual herbs in it, that's the shop's responsibility, not mine. That's for the investigators to determine, I said. She leaned forward slightly. Margaret, I want you to think carefully about what you're doing. You're 67 years old. You live alone. This house. She glanced around. That appraising look I had noticed on the very first night. Daniel and I have been patient. We've been attentive. We've looked out for you. If you pursue this, you will lose your son. You understand that? He will have to choose. There it was. The real language beneath the polished surface. Then he'll choose, I said. That's his right. Something flashed across her face. Frustration, maybe surprise. I don't think she had expected that answer. You'll regret this, she said, and her voice was very quiet. I promise you that. Renee, I said, I spent 3 months getting sicker and sicker while I drank the tea you brought me and told myself you had finally come around. I regret that. I won't regret protecting myself. She stood. She straightened her coat. The mask came back. Smooth, controlled. Think about it, she said, as though I hadn't already spoken. She left. I waited until I heard her car pull away, then I locked the door, sat down at the kitchen table, and let out a long, slow breath. She had just threatened me in my own kitchen, and she had revealed, in those careful words about the house and Daniel's choice, exactly what she had been thinking about all along. I wrote down everything she had said, word for word, and I called Detective Howell's voicemail and read it to her. Then I called Patricia. I need a few days, I told her. I need to just be still for a bit. That's allowed, Patricia said. You've done the hard part. Let the process work. So I did. I drove to my sister Carol's house in Ohio for 4 days. I told her everything. Carol cried and then she got angry, which was very Carol. Grief and fury in rapid sequence. She made me soup and we watched old movies, and I slept for 9 hours 2 nights in a row, which I hadn't done in months. The iron in my blood was still low. My heart still stuttered faintly in ways I noticed only in quiet moments. But I was out of my house on Clover Street, away from the wooden box and the memory of every cup I had swallowed in good faith. And for 4 days, I was simply a woman resting, gathering herself, preparing for what came next. I came back from Carol's on a Thursday morning in February. The house on Clover Street looked the same as it always had. White paint, green porch swing, the bare oak tree in the front yard that would bloom again in April. I stood at the curb for a moment before going in, just looking at it. 30 years of my life were in that house. Harold had painted those shutters himself every 5 years, refusing to hire anyone. My son had learned to ride his bicycle on that sidewalk. I was not going to lose this because of Renee. Inside, I made coffee, unpacked my bag, and checked my phone. There were 2 missed calls from Daniel and 1 from a number I didn't recognize. I listened to Daniel's messages. The first was tense and short, asking me to call him back. The second, left the following day, was quieter, more confused. He said Renee had told him about her visit to my house and that she was very upset. He asked me again to think about whether we could handle this as a family. I set the phone down and drank my coffee. That same afternoon, Renee sent me a card in the mail. A plain white card with a short, handwritten note inside. The handwriting was careful and neat. She wrote that she understood I had been unwell and that feelings had run high. but that she hoped we could find a way to speak calmly, that she missed having a relationship with me, that families were too important to let misunderstandings destroy them. Misunderstandings. I read the word 3 times. Then I placed the card in the manila folder where I was keeping every piece of documentation related to the investigation. Evidence of her character, if nothing else. Detective Howell had told me, during a brief call before my trip to Carroll's, that the investigation was proceeding. They had contacted the wellness shop in Mechanicsburg. The owner, a woman named Gloria Tipton, had told investigators that she sold no products containing foxglove, that she would never stock Digitalis in any form due to the liability risk. She had no record of the specific tea blend. No receipt matched the product. Renee's story about the shop had no paper trail behind it. I was thinking about all of this the following Sunday when there was a knock at the door. I looked out the window first, a habit I had developed. It was my neighbor Ellen Carey from 2 houses down, holding a casserole dish. Ellen was 71, recently widowed, a woman I had exchanged pleasantries with for years but never known closely. She had heard, through the quiet, efficient network of a neighborhood where people had lived side by side for decades, that I had been unwell. "I don't want to intrude," she said when I opened the door. "I just thought I made too much lasagna." I stood back and let her in. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table that had become the center of so much of this story, and we talked for 2 hours. I told her more than I intended to, and when I finished, Ellen set her coffee cup down and said something that stayed with me. "My first husband," she said quietly, "was a man who used my kindness against me for 11 years. He knew I wanted to believe the best of people, and he used it like a tool. It took me a long time to understand that being trusting is not the same as being foolish. You trusted her because that's what decent people do. That's not your failure. It's hers." I had not cried since the first night Patricia had shown me the test results, but I came close then. Ellen left me her phone number and made me promise to call her if I needed anything. She also told me that her granddaughter was a paralegal at a civil law firm in Harrisburg. "Not criminal," she said, "but if you ever need to think about other angles, property, liability, that sort of thing, I'll introduce you." I wrote down the name. Patricia called that evening to check in. She had submitted her medical documentation formally to the investigating detective and was prepared to testify if the case went to a hearing. "You have solid ground to stand on," she told me. "Don't let them shake you," and they were watching. I knew that. Renee was too strategic to simply stop after the kitchen confrontation. She would be monitoring, through Daniel, through whatever information she could gather, looking for signs that I was weakening, reconsidering, afraid. She would be waiting for a moment of doubt. I had doubt. Of course I had doubt. There were evenings when I sat in the quiet house and wondered if I was truly strong enough to see this through. The legal process, the loss of family warmth, the possibility that Daniel might pull further away. There were moments when the word misunderstanding in her handwriting floated back to me, and I felt the old reflex, the familiar pull toward reconciliation, toward smoothing things over. But then I thought about Patricia's face going pale. I thought about the lab report. I thought about 3 months of waking up exhausted and trembling and wondering what was wrong with me. And I thought about Ellen's words, "It's not your failure. It's hers." That was enough. The cold calm I had found in those 4 days in Ohio had settled into something permanent. I wasn't running on fear anymore. I was running on clarity. There is a difference, and it matters. Fear makes you reactive. Clarity makes you methodical. I was methodical. I kept my appointments with Patricia. I had a follow-up EKG that showed my heart had already begun to stabilize. 3 weeks without the tea, and my body was quietly, stubbornly healing itself. I documented everything. I slept. I watered my plant. I fed the cat. Renee was watching, waiting for me to crack. I was not going to crack. It was a Saturday afternoon in late February when they came together. Both of them. Daniel's car in my driveway, which I had not seen in 3 weeks. I watched from the kitchen window before I answered the door. They were standing on the porch. Renee in a soft cream-colored coat. Daniel with his hands in his pockets, his shoulders slightly forward the way they always were when he was anxious. He had his father's posture when he was uncomfortable. I had always loved that about him, and I felt a sting of grief at the sight of it. I opened the door. "Mom?" Daniel's voice was careful and warm in a way that felt rehearsed. "Can we come in? We just want to talk." I looked at Renee. Her expression was open, mild. The very picture of someone who came in peace. "Come in," I said. They sat together on the living room sofa. I sat in Harold's armchair across from them. The room was bright with afternoon light. Everything looked normal. I suppose that was the point. Daniel spoke first. He said they had been doing a lot of thinking, that this situation had been painful for everyone, that he understood I had been unwell, and that it had frightened me, and that he was sorry he hadn't been more attentive to my health. He said it smoothly, and parts of it were genuine. I could hear the real regret under the careful words. Daniel was not, I reminded myself, a bad person. He was a man who wanted very badly for his mother and his wife to exist in peace, and who had perhaps never looked too closely at the gap between what Renee presented and what she was. Then Renee spoke. She was masterful. I want to say that honestly. She folded her hands in her lap, and she spoke with exactly the right degree of vulnerability, enough to seem genuine, not enough to seem desperate. She said she had been devastated by what had happened, that she had bought that tea in good faith, that she would never in her life intentionally harm me, that the very suggestion was something she couldn't bear. Her voice softened at exactly the right moments. Her eyes were steady. "Margaret," she said, "I think we both know that what you're doing will destroy this family. Daniel is in the middle of something he didn't cause. You and I both love him. And I'm asking you, woman to woman, to let this go. Talk to the detective. Tell her it was a misunderstanding, that you were frightened but you don't want to pursue it. We can start fresh. We can be a real family. Let this go." The audacity of that phrase, spoken from my own sofa, by the woman whose tea had put my heart into irregular rhythms. I looked at her. I took my time. "Renee," I said, "do you know what it was like to wake up every morning for 3 months, not understanding why I was getting sicker? To think I might be developing something serious? To lie awake wondering whether I was going to see another spring?" She opened her mouth. "I'm not finished," I said quietly. "I'm not pursuing this out of spite or anger. I'm pursuing it because the lab confirmed what was in that tea, because my doctor documented my decline, and because I have a right to know exactly what was done to me and why. That process will continue. A conversation on my sofa doesn't change that." Daniel leaned forward. "Mom, please." "Daniel." I looked at my son and let him see everything: the love, the grief, and the absolute immovability. "I love you. I have loved you your entire life. But I will not stop protecting myself to make your marriage more comfortable. That is not a choice I'm willing to make." Something shifted in Renee then. The softness evaporated. It happened quickly. A tightening around the eyes, a micro-expression of genuine fury that she recovered almost instantly. But I saw it. I had been watching her face for 4 months, and I knew it now. "You're making a mistake," she said. "You said that the last time you were here," I replied. They left within the minute. Daniel looked back at me from the door. Confused, hurt, reaching for something he didn't have the words for. I held his gaze. I hoped he understood, even then, that what I was doing was not against him. I locked the door behind them and stood in my hallway. My heart was beating faster than I would have liked. The echo of what the tea had done, my compromised system responding to stress. I pressed my hand to my chest and breathed. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. Was I afraid? Yes. Renee's anger, briefly visible, was not the anger of someone who was innocent and insulted. It was the anger of someone whose plan was failing, and people whose plans are failing sometimes become unpredictable. But the fear was clean. It wasn't the hollow, directionless fear of the sick months, when I didn't understand what was happening to me. This fear had a shape. I knew what I was afraid of and why. And knowing the shape of a thing means you can step around it. I called Patricia that evening. I told her about the visit, word for word. She listened without interrupting. "Good," she said when I finished. "You held your ground. That's exactly right." Then I called Detective Howell and left a message describing the visit, the offer to drop the investigation, the framing, the moment Renee's composure had slipped. I wrote it all down, every word, every exchange, every look. The file was getting thick. The formal interview at the police station happened on a Wednesday in early March. Detective Howell had called me the previous Friday to say that she and her colleague were ready to speak with Renee under caution. She asked me to come in beforehand to review the evidence and understand the process. I drove to the station with my folder of documentation and sat across from Detective Howell in that same small room. She walked me through what they had: the lab results, Patricia's medical report, the timeline I had provided, the statement from Gloria Tipton at the wellness shop confirming she had never sold that product, phone records that placed Renee near 3 different botanical suppliers in the months before she first brought me the tea, purchases made in cash. But the geographic data from her phone was consistent with visits to those locations. And one additional piece, which Detective Howell presented last. A search of Renee's laptop, executed under warrant, had found a series of internet searches conducted over the previous 8 months. Searches for the effects of digitalis on elderly patients, searches for undetectable poisoning methods, searches for inheritance law in Pennsylvania. Inheritance law. I sat with that for a moment. I had suspected it. I had told myself I suspected it while trying to keep an open mind. But sitting in that room, hearing it stated plainly, was different from suspecting it in the dark at 3 a.m. The searches had dates on them. The earliest one was 6 weeks before she first knocked on my door with that ribbon-tied box. 6 weeks of research before she ever called me Mom. She hadn't acted on impulse or desperation. She had planned it the way you plan a renovation, methodically, patiently, with an eye toward the finished result. The finished result had been me, fading quietly in my own kitchen. "How are you?" Detective Howell asked. "I'm fine," I said. And I was, in the way that matters. Not happy, not undamaged, but steady. The interview with Renee took place that afternoon. I was not present, of course. I waited in the station's outer area, which smelled like old coffee and carpet cleaner, and I looked at my hands and thought about Harold, about the green swing, about all of the ordinary things I had almost lost without ever understanding why. I thought about all the evenings I had sat at my kitchen table, the wooden box open beside me, genuinely grateful that my daughter-in-law had finally shown me warmth. I had been so willing to be grateful. I had wanted so badly to believe that the family I still had was intact and real. That was the part that stayed with me most, sitting in that waiting room. Not the anger, not the fear, the grief of having been fooled by my own hope. Detective Howell came out 2 hours later. She had a lawyer present, she told me. She maintained that the tea was a well-intentioned gift, that she had no knowledge of the foxglove content. A pause. But when we presented the search history, she stopped answering questions. I nodded. Of course she had stopped. There was nothing left to say when the dates lined up so precisely, when 6 weeks of deliberate research sat directly beside the first evening she walked through my door with a ribbon and a smile. Her attorney asked for time, Detective Howell continued. We're formally referring the case to the DA's office. Given the medical evidence, the lab results, the purchase history, and the search records, there is a strong basis for charges. She looked at me directly. This is going forward, Mrs. Cooley. I thanked her. My voice was level. I drove home in the early evening light, past the familiar streets, past the gas station and the library where I still volunteered on Tuesdays. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a moment before going inside. Daniel had called while I was at the station. I listened to the message in the car. His voice was unrecognizable, raw, as though something had broken open in him. He had spoken to the detective, separately, voluntarily. He had told them that he had not known about the tea's contents, that he had not participated in any plan, that he was cooperating fully. He said he was sorry. He said it 3 times. The last time his voice cracked. I believed him. That was the hardest part of the whole story. Not the fear, not the physical damage, not even the confrontations. It was understanding that my son had loved his wife and trusted her, and in doing so had been used as a conduit for something he would never have chosen. His blindness had been real, and I had to hold both things at once. That his blindness had put me in danger, and that he had not done it deliberately. The next day, Renee's attorney contacted mine. I had hired a lawyer by then, a quiet, thorough woman named Sharon Beck, who specialized in personal injury and had a manner that made her seem unremarkable until you watched her work. The attorney's message was brief. Renee was willing to discuss a resolution. I sat with Sharon in her office and we discussed it. Then I sent my answer back through Sharon. No. No private resolution, no settlement, no quiet agreement that would let this dissolve without consequence. The DA's office would proceed. The evidence would be examined publicly. What had been done to me deserved to be visible and on record. I had spent 3 months invisible even to myself, not understanding what was happening inside my own body. I was not going to let what Renee had done become invisible too. Sharon raised an eyebrow. That's your right, she said. Yes, I said. It is. There is a kind of cold certainty that comes from having been quietly, methodically harmed and having done every correct thing in response. I was not angry anymore, not in the hot, reactive way of the first weeks. I had moved through fear and grief and arrived somewhere else, a place of complete, settled resolve. I knew exactly what had happened. I had documented it precisely, and I was going to let the truth stand in the light without flinching. Renee had bet on my gratitude. She had bet that I was the kind of woman who would be too grateful, too confused, too polite, too afraid of losing her son to push back. She had misjudged me completely, and that was her final mistake. The trial, if you can call it that, because Renee's attorney ultimately pushed for a plea agreement in the face of the evidence, took 4 months to complete. I want to describe that time accurately, which means acknowledging that it was not clean or swift. Legal processes are not clean or swift. There were delays, motions, procedural steps that meant I was sitting with the full weight of what had happened to me for an extended period, while the system moved at its own pace. There were days when the slowness of it was its own particular exhaustion, but the foundation held. Patricia testified formally regarding her medical observations and the significance of the EKG findings. Gloria Tipton testified that she had never sold the product and that her shop had never stocked Foxglove in any form. The forensic technician testified about the lab analysis, and Detective Howell's colleague presented the digital evidence, the search history, the geographic data, the cash purchases. Renee's defense attempted 3 arguments in sequence, each of which collapsed under the weight of the evidence. First, that the tea had been purchased in good faith from an unverified supplier and that she had no knowledge of its contents. This ran directly into the search history. Second, that the search history was circumstantial research, not evidence of intent. That Renee worked in real estate and had been researching estate and inheritance issues for professional reasons. This ran into the geographic data placing her near the botanical suppliers and the specificity of the digitalis searches. Third, and finally, that the medical decline could not be definitively attributed to the tea rather than natural age-related deterioration. This last argument was the one I found personally offensive, in the way that only a woman who has been told her health problems were probably just age can understand. But Patricia had anticipated it, and her documentation was meticulous. The timeline was clear, the blood markers were clear, and my EKG, taken 7 months earlier, showing a clean result, and again 3 months into drinking the tea showing the irregularity, and again 6 weeks after stopping showing significant improvement, that trajectory was not ambiguous. Each defense argument fell. The plea came in June. Renee pleaded guilty to a charge of assault causing bodily harm, a negotiated reduction from the original charge of aggravated poisoning in exchange for her cooperation and the avoidance of a full trial. It was not everything the DA had originally sought. Sharon explained the trade-offs carefully, and I understood them. The plea meant certainty of consequence rather than the risk of acquittal on a higher charge. The sentence was 18 months, suspended for 2 years on strict conditions, including no contact with me, mandatory psychological evaluation, community service, and a criminal record that would follow her through every real estate license application and background check for the rest of her life. I watched her in the courtroom when the sentence was read. She was composed until the moment she wasn't. When the judge said, "criminal record of conviction," something in her face changed. The real, deep understanding that this was permanent, that it would not dissolve, that the careful, constructed surface she had spent her life maintaining had a crack in it, now that could not be repaired. The career she had built in real estate, the social identity she had worked so hard to project, all of it ran on a clean record and a trustworthy face. Both were now compromised. I felt no satisfaction in seeing that. I want to be honest about that. There was no moment of triumph or revenge. What I felt was something quieter and more final. The sense that what was true had been made visible, and that the system, imperfect and slow as it was, had done what it was supposed to do. Daniel was not in the courtroom. We had spoken 3 times during the 4 months of proceedings. Careful, painful conversations in which he said he was sorry more times than I could count, and in which I said I believed him, and in which neither of us quite knew what the future looked like. He had moved out of the house he shared with Renee. He was living in a small apartment in Harrisburg, apparently going to therapy, trying to understand what he had missed and how. He called me the evening after the plea. "Mom," he said, "I'm sorry. I know that's not enough, but I need you to know. I am so sorry." "I know," I said. "I love you, Daniel." "I love you too." We were quiet together on the phone for a moment. "Come for dinner," I said. "Sunday. I'll make pot roast." He came. Sharon filed a civil suit on my behalf for medical costs, ongoing cardiac monitoring expenses, and emotional distress. Renee's lawyer settled quickly, without contesting. The amount was not enormous, but it covered every medical bill from the past 8 months and more. I used some of it to repaint the house. White again, same color, but fresh. New paint on the shutters. Harold would have approved. Summer came to Clover Street the way it always did. Slowly, then all at once. The oak tree was full and green by June, and the porch swing was the best place in the world to sit in the late afternoon. Mr. Gray supervised the street from the railing. I brought my coffee out in the mornings again. I was well. By June, Patricia signed off on my checkup with the same words as 2 years before. Keep doing what you're doing. The tremors were gone. The fatigue was gone. I felt, for the first time in a very long time, like myself. The actual Margaret Cooley, who walked in the mornings and volunteered at the library and felt genuinely uncomplicated, glad to be alive. Ellen Carey had become a real friend. Wednesday lunches, Patricia, Ellen, and I, every week. Ellen was sharp and funny and had no patience for nonsense. I had built a small, solid circle of people who knew the whole story and had chosen to stay. That was everything. Daniel came for dinner most Sundays. We were rebuilding, carefully and honestly. He brought good wine, ate too much pot roast, helped with the dishes. Sometimes we sat on the porch after dinner without talking, just together in the evening quiet. He had filed for divorce and was seeing a therapist, slowly learning to see what he had long refused to. Renee's real estate license was revoked following the conviction. The career she had spent 12 years building was gone. She had left Harrisburg. I didn't know where, and I didn't need to. She had taken enough of my life already. The civil settlement covered everything. I used the remainder on the house. The porch railing, the kitchen faucet, a new water heater, small, solid, ordinary things. The things a life is actually made of. In July, Patricia and Ellen and I drove to a cottage in the Pocono Mountains for a long weekend. On the last evening, Patricia raised her glass. To Margaret, Ellen raised hers. To not dying, I laughed. A full, real laugh from somewhere uncomplicated. To not dying, I said and drank. Life was ordinary. Life was mine. I had protected it. 3 months of drinking because someone wrapped it in kindness. Here is what I learned. Love is not always what it claims to be. The people who insist most loudly on your trust are sometimes the ones who deserve it least. But I also learned that protecting yourself is not cruelty. It is simply what you owe to the person you have spent a lifetime becoming. Listen to your body. Listen to that quiet voice that says something is wrong. It deserves your attention. What would you have done in my place? Thank you for being here. Leave a comment. I read everyone.